I am live. I'm reading A Lot to Remember. It's a book by Joan Marshall Grant. She was a writer of her own farm memories. This book was published in 1962. She passed away in 1989. She wrote amazing farm memory books such as Winged Pharaoh and Eyes of Horus. 7 of them she wrote, and anyway, this one is a book about the area in France entitled Lot, and she talks about her journeys. This is chapter 27, The Saint and the Sinners. The great Abbey of Conquest and its magnificent medieval treasure is 36 kilometers north-northwest of Rhodes by the N601. A road which then follows the Dordogne for another 6 kilometers through the gorge until it joins the Lot, 23 kilometers downstream of Aix-en-Tragueuse. The first character in the long history of conquest is Didon the hermit, who must have chosen this harsh, arid valley to ensure solitude for his mystical meditations, which, not long after his death, caused Louis le Debonair to issue, in 819, a royal charter for the foundation of a monastery on the site of his hermitage. 30 years later, Pepin II, king of Aquitaine, donated further domains which included Figeac and rich valley lands of the river Selig. These lands were farmed by monks from Conquest, who established thereon a second community which within 40 years had become so prosperous that the parent monastery would have been abandoned except for the ingenuity of a monk called Ariviscus, inspired either by a sincere belief that his present dour surroundings were the most suitable soil for the cultivation of the spirit, or a determination not to be outdone by the material efficiency of rival brethren. Artificius recognized that conquest survival depended on its ability to attract pilgrims. It already had one advantage in an accessibility which would cause the pilgrim to feel that he had acquired merit merely by the effort of getting there, and so already be sufficiently freed from his sense of unworthiness to be able to accept a blessing. But it lacked the essential factor, being neither the site of a renowned miracle nor in the possession of a miraculous relic. For instance, a relic such as was possessed by the monks of Agen. So Ariviscus went to the monastery of Agen, posing as a secular pilgrim who wished to work there as a lay brother. He was accepted, and after several years as a postulant, took vows and was at last allowed to take his turn in guarding the relics of Sainte Foy, a girl who at the age of 12 had been martyred at Agen on the 6th of October 303. Saint Foy must have recognized that Ariviscus had true faith in her powers, for instead of being offended when he was forced to open her tomb and fled from the monastery carrying in a sack the charred remains of the body she used to inhabit, she afforded him magical protection, hiding him with mist and employing thunder and cloudbursts to baffle his pursuers. She arrived at Conquest with Ariviscus on the 4th of January 866 and found her new environment so congenial that pilgrims in ever-increasing numbers came to seek her aid and richly rewarded the guardians of her beneficence. When, in 980, she restored sight to a pilgrim called Gilbert, who had been blinded by having his eyes torn out, her miracles became renowned throughout Christendom, bringing such lavish tribute that during the following century the abbey grew to the full splendor of its stature. The tide of pilgrims flowed steadily to conquest until the 13th century, and then began to ebb, for it was becoming difficult even for the most devout to maintain the faith required to manifest miracles when sainthood was so unjustly associated with the policy of a church which throughout the Midi was performing abominations not only against a rival sect but against the fundamental Christian ethic. The victims were the Cathari, literally the pure, who held it to be their duty to protest against corruption, either in the church or in the social order, and believed that only the perfected in spirit were ready to enter paradise, while the vast majority of mankind, including the members of their own faith, still required physical reincarnation. Even more heretical was their refusal to join crusades on the ground that killing fellow humans, even if they happened to be infidels, was incompatible with the specific instructions that it is the basic duty of a man to learn how to love his neighbor. The Pope, Innocent III, was keenly aware that the teaching of Jesus must not be allowed to interfere with the authority of the Church, especially the teaching of reincarnation, which had only been declared a hearsay in the 5th century on the grounds that it undermined the power of the priests over the people. So, as the 6th Crusade was about to set off for the Holy Land for another round with the Saracens, he rerouted it to the Comte of Toulouse, with instructions to exterminate heretics at home instead of abroad. No doubt most of the Crusaders were relieved that the religious beliefs of their new opponents did not allow them to fight back or even to defend themselves. And if the more chivalrous knights had qualms, they could console themselves with the thought that only 50 years earlier the blessed Saint Bernard had decreed, "The Knight of Christ kills with a clear conscience and dies in the greater tranquillity. In dying he finds his own salvation, and in killing he is doing the work of Christ." The King of France, Philip Augustus, cannot have been pleased by the prospect of foreign soldiers massacring large number of his people, whose tenets made them model citizens and taxpayers, but there were two reasons why he dared not protest. The majority of the French Cathari, there were 72 sects of them in Europe, were in the Comté of Toulouse, which was ruled by the most powerful and the most rebellious of the remaining feudal overlords, who, had he not been otherwise engaged, might have joined forces with King John and helped England and Aquitaine to retain their French possessions. Even more important than this counsel of expediency was Philip's personal experience of the power of Innocent III, who had excommunicated him for repudiating his second wife, Ingeborg of Denmark, although he had never seen her until the marriage, which he was unable to consummate because she aroused in him so violently an antipathy that he could not bear her even to be in the same room. With excommunication failed to bring him to heel, the papal interdict was extended to the entire population, which meant that throughout France there were no religious ceremonies whatsoever, neither communion, nor confession, nor marriage, nor extreme unction, nor burial service, a state of affairs which continued for 8 months until, on the 8th of September 1200, for the sake of his people and his throne, the king had to overcome his squeamishness. Philip was ashamed of being squeamish, for when he was in Syria on the 5th Crusade, it had caused him to flee in terror from the epidemic caused by the rotting corpses of 6,000 decapitated prisoners. So leaving Richard Coeur de Lion, the son of his father's first wife, seriously in the lurch, So he was thankful to leave the fate of the Qatari to Simon de Montfort, a minor noble who was put in charge of the field operations by Raymond VII. He sent his son, who later became the Louis XV, to take part in the later stages of this ruthless suppression of pacifism. On the 21st of July, 1209, Simon de Montfort opened the campaign by directing the massacre of 7,000 men, women and children at Béziers. During the next 15 years, at least 100,000 more Qatari were slaughtered, the less unfortunate dying by rope, fire or sword, the rest set free to die slowly, the males having been emasculated to ensure that they should not breed more heretics, which seemed a needless precaution considering that their eyes had been put out, their eardrums pierced by red-hot wires, their teeth wrenched from their jaws and their hands lopped off at the wrists. Yet the fanatical sadism of Simon de Montfort was not satisfied even by such torrents of blood, for in 1219, when the garrison of Marmande, a little town of 5,000 inhabitants near the confluence of the Lot and the Garonne, had surrendered, and he was holding a council of war with the Dauphin about their disposal, it only required a bishop to stand up and demand that all should be killed as heretics for him immediately to agree. At once the hue and cry was raised. Soldiers poured into the town with drawn swords, and the butchery began. Heads dismembered, bodies, limbs, brains, entrails piled up in the streets as though they had rained from the sky. Everywhere the ground was red and saturated with blood, except for the very few who succumbed in remaining hidden. Neither man nor woman, neither young nor old, survived, and the dreadful shambles was then destroyed by fire. The Qatari had been most numerous in the neighborhood of Albi, which caused them also to be known as the Albingenses. And when their persecution abated, through lack of further victims, only to be succeeded by the tortures of the Inquisition, the townspeople at last revolted and hunted their bishops into his cathedral, from which he excommunicated them en masse. So when Bernard de Castanet became Holy Inquisitor for the diocese, he built a new cathedral at Albi, which, with its adjoining palace, could serve as fortress to protect him from their wrath. When they at last appealed to the king for protection, a cohort of bishops was sent from Paris to conduct an ecclesiastical inquiry, and removed Bernard by prompting him to the see of Le Puy, where he died a cardinal. Although the architectural glories of the cathedral and bishop's palace of Albi are such that it now seemed more opposite to liken the colour of the soaring brick walls to faded roses rather than faded blood, it must have been most aggravating for the chapter of conquest to have such adverse publicity, emanating from a bishopric only 60 miles away as the carrion crow flew. The monks, like the pilgrims, dwindled in numbers, and by 1424 only 28 remained, and so the great abbey was deemed redundant and deconsecrated. The monastic buildings must have been used for some secular purpose, for the treasure remained at conquest and was successfully hidden from the Protestants who, in 1568, tried to get their hands on it, and failing, set fire to the nave of the abbey. The treasure was again hidden during the Revolution, when the mayor received warning that the Republican officials who had just finished looting the Cathedral of Rhodes were on their way to his village to continue their work of melting down church treasure into coin, as was being done throughout France. The mayor assembled his people and divided the treasure among them, making each family responsible for an individual piece. When the Republicans arrived, saying that conquest could now have the honor of participating in the glorious revolution, he replied, feigning regret, that they had celebrated their revolution the previous week by zealously stripping the abbey of every object of value. So the Republicans went away without protest, no doubt recognizing that wresting loot from the tough local peasantry, who for centuries had been adept at hiding their small possessions from tax gatherers and abbey bailiffs, would be a far more dangerous undertaking than commandeering it from dispirited churchmen. When the terror was over, each family brought back to the mayor the piece which had been entrusted to them, which is why conquest still has one of the few medieval treasures that exist anywhere in the world. The next chapter is chapter 28, A Feast of Fishes, and I believe is the last chapter of this book.